Hello guys, this is Tina. How are you doing today? Okay, anyway, let's start. In this lecture, in this video, I'm gonna talk about exception handling in Spring MVC. And in Spring, there are two handler exception resolver which is supported out of the box. And let's talk about the first one first. Okay, the first one, the first one is called response status exception resolver, and the corresponding status annotation is called the response status. This annotation has three usage. Okay, two usage. Sorry, you can customize in two usage, but it actually has more. The first one is used in the REST. If you have RESTful application and you can using this annotation on RESTful methods. Okay, in the controller, what it does, give you one example. Okay, suppose you have a class. Let's call user controller. If you don't understand this part, don't worry, okay? We'll talk about this one later. REST controller. And in this controller, you have a method, suppose called a public void save user. And here using request and body, which is either convert JSON or XML to be an object in Java, okay? And here you save user to DB. And now probably you also have an annotation called get mapping, right? Post mapping, sorry. Post mapping. Suppose we call save, okay? And by default, if no exception happened inside this method, by default it's gonna return the status code is 200. The reason will be okay, but it's more expressive if you give the user information like is status code is kind of like a 201 and the reason is created. Because you are save a user, you kind of like create a user into the DB, right? It's more better compared to using the default one, which is 200, okay. So to customize that, you can do is using the annotation on this method called response status. And you can customize for the value is to give the status code, HTTP status, which is called, I think it's called created, probably all of them are capital. You can give a reason you can say user created successfully, okay? Okay, this is the first use, customize the return the status information in the RESTful method. The other part we use it is most likely together with the exception handling, okay? And in the second one is called with the error handling. In error handling, you can also categorized in 2 or 3 based on what you think about it. The first one is together work with annotation exception handler. We will talk about this annotation later. This annotation can only be applied on a method which is actually catch particular exception. Then you provide your way to handle that exception. And You can also using the response status code together with this exception handler. Then you can customize the returned status code and the reason. Second one, controller advice. The same when using controller advice, which means in the controller advice you can have lots of exception handler annotated methods, and your response code most likely will be added together with this exception handler. Then you can using in this annotated class. Okay, I will show you example later. Okay. Second one is annotate, TAT, on customized exception class. Give you one example on this one, because these two, exception handler and control advice, I will talk next one. Okay, so I don't give example here. Annotated on customized exception class. Suppose you have your own customized exception class, like a public class. Let's say user not found. How about not found, right? Exception, which is you have to extend runtime exception. Okay, and here you can have your private message and other methods you want. And if you want to customize the default status code and the reason, you can do is like this one. Add a response status, and you can also give the value, which is to customize status code. You can give a reason, okay, instead of using the default one. And this is all the cases how to using the response status. And for the RESTful method, when we talk about RESTful, you will see how it's gonna be used. And for this video, we all more focus on error handling. Okay, you need to understand the error handling. So let's talk about the second one. Out of the box provided by supremacy, called the exception handler, exception resolver. The corresponding annotation is called exception handler annotation, and this annotation only can be applied on method. Response status can be applied on method and can also be applied on the class. Okay, so what it does, suppose you want to in your user controller in this example. Okay, suppose here we have a public class user controller. Okay, and then you have the controller here, and suppose what do you say, user not found. Okay, suppose here you have a method like this one, public string get user by ID. Okay, then here you use something called a request param and int or integer, doesn't matter, or string ID. Okay, and here you're using get mapping, and then here you're using particular way. Okay, like get user, how about by ID. Okay, something. And suppose if not found, you throw exception through that new user not found exception, right? When you throw exception, if you don't customize, it will using Tomcat the default error page to see, which has a big 404 and have the reasons, right? And as this is not a good user experience, most likely you will customize the 404 error page and for all kinds of exception page through. And one way you can do in Spring is inside this controller. Inside this controller, you can have a method and probably call handle user not found exception, okay? Not found, sorry. F-O-U-N-D. And you annotate this method using exception handler. And here you can put what kind of exception you want to catch or handle by this method. Here we're using user not found exception CEPT.class. And here you can do something like a return to error your own error page, customized error page, which is much more friendly than the default one. And this is one way. Your exception handling method is located in this controller class, right? This exception handling method is located inside this user controller, and it only handle exception, which is user not found exception. If you want to handle others, you can write another exception handle method and place in this controller. But in this way, it has a limitation because this exception handler method is located in user controller. So suppose you have another controller which also through user not found exception. It cannot be caught or handled by this exception handler method because this exception handler method can only handle user not found exception class thrown by user controller. And also, if the user controller have invoked method in the service or invoked method in the repository or in the service or repository that through user not found, and it can also be catched. But if in another controller class, it cannot be handled by this method, okay? Only for particular controller. So the question you might have so now is, if I want to handle for global, some exception should be globally, like IO exception, or you have a general exception catch method. I want to not for particular user, I want to be global. And what you should do? Spring has another thing called the ControllerAdvice. Okay, let me using the black. Okay, called the ControllerAdvice annotation. This ControllerAdvice annotation only be applied on class level. Okay, cannot be applied on a method. You can think about this ControllerAdvice as interceptor annotation interceptor. Okay. In this ControllerAdvice class, you can put three things. One is init bind. Okay. Second one is model attribute annotated class. Third one is exception handler. Exception handler annotated method probably together with response status. If you customize, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let me give you one example. Now we have a class, public class. Let's call global stuff. Okay, not good at naming. Okay, really bad stuff. And let me scroll down a little bit. Okay, and now you can annotate this class with what? ControllerAdvice. Okay. And if you want to have an exception handler which handle for all the exceptions thrown by all the controller or repository or service, what you can do is here you can place a method. Let's go string and handle handle exception. Okay, this one is to handle IO exception. You also can have IO exception here to get the message or the stack all the things, and you annotate with exception handler. Okay, in the exception handler, you can give a reason, a value. Value is the status code. Oh, sorry. That's the status code. Sorry. You have to give the class, not the value. Sorry. Here, I was thinking about the response status. You can give which kind of exception class you're gonna be caught by this method using IO exception dot class here. Okay. Let me make it smaller here. Okay, very good. So since this exception handler method is located in the ControllerAdvice, then this exception handler method will handle IO exceptions which is thrown by all the controller, all the service, all the repository. Okay, that's the power of a ControllerAdvice. Probably in this handler mapping, you can also add a response status annotation, have a value, and have a reason to customize the status code and the reason. This is as you want. Okay. So next one. In the ControllerAdvice, you can have a mode attribute. Suppose I have another method here, public string called app name. Let me promote my channel. Okay, channel name, and you return Miss XING. Okay, and here you annotate with model attribute. We talked about model attribute before. When you put a model attribute, annotate on a method in the controller for every request mapping. For every request mapping, it's gonna add a model attribute in the model for you. Okay, in that particular controller, like a channel. And if you have a model attribute, this method inside the controller annotated class, which means this channel will be global. Because before getting into any request mapping method, it's gonna add an attribute. The key is channel, the value is Miss XING into the request scope. So it's gonna be global. You can access the channel everywhere. Okay. The other one is init binder. Init binder, I think it's gonna be used for the set this a lot of fields or a lot of fields. If you are interested, you can take a look at it by yourself. Okay, you can kind of like you can suppress the data binding, what kind of fields the user can submit in the form to the server side. Then you can, if they have something you don't need, you can have suppress the fields get. Then you can throw exception in your controller. Okay. Last one I want to talk about ControllerAdvice is if you just annotate a ControllerAdvice, it's gonna be global, and you can also narrow it down to particular package. Suppose your application get bigger, you have a user folder which contains all the controllers belongs to the user. You can have a product package which contains a lot of controllers belongs to the product's logic. Then in the ControllerAdvice, you can have also something called the base packages. then you can narrow down to this global stuff. It's not that global, it's limited to particular package. Okay, so that's it for this video, and we talk about response status exception handler and the annotation response status and what kind of usage of this one. And we also talk about exception handler, this annotation, and how to use it. And we also talk about the controller advice, how to use it. Okay, so if you still have questions, you can watch my next video. I'm gonna lead you code step by step how to use each of the annotation. And if you still have doubts, you can leave me a comment. And that's it. See you next time. Bye bye.